how to gain senior leadership buy-in, achieving success in operational excellence initiatives. Leadership buy-in continues to be the #1 cause for project failure in operational excellence. If you don't have it, you really need it. So how can you avoid this major roadblock in your business critical initiatives? 3 speakers have come to us courtesy of IPMC to share tips, stories, case study examples, and their own perspectives regarding best practice approaches to gaining and holding on to leadership buy-in. Joining us today are Tony Screamer, Strategic Business Consultant, IPMC, Rob Neufelder, Director, Regional Operations, IPMC, and Greg Flickinger, VPM and CE, Schneider's-Lance, Inc. Before I hand over to Tony, 2 very quick housekeeping points. First, as always, there is time for a brief Q&A period at the end of today's presentation. You can submit your questions at any point throughout today's presentation using the text box that you should see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Secondly, if you'd like a copy of the slides of today's presentation, simply send us an email or contact Tony, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to address that for you. With the housekeeping out of the way, I would like to pass it over to you, Tony.
Great. Craig, thank you. My name is Tony Screamer. I've been in the profession of project management for over 18 years. I am a project management consultant with Integrated Project Management Company, and I will be providing a brief background to help frame up today's discussion and then introduce our 2 speakers. This past summer, Integrated Project Management and the PEX Network, we collaborated on a survey, and that survey sought to understand the effectiveness and execution of process excellence initiatives. And we polled over 300 PEX members, and they had responded and provided their objective perspective to questions that ranged from ability to execute process excellence initiatives to factors of initiative success. And those survey results were compiled into a summary report, and this wonderfully engaging infographic that you see here was produced by the PEX Network. Both the infographic and the summary report can be found on the PEX Network website or the IPM website. So what were a few of the key takeaways from the survey? Well, over 64% of the respondents rated their organization as being fair to poor at executing on process excellence initiatives. 13% responded that the majority of their projects consistently met their original goals, so only 13%. And only 35% rated their organization's ability to successfully execute process excellence initiatives as good to excellent. So we sought to dig a little bit deeper and explore what were some of the factors of success first, and these ranged from ensuring that you have top-level management support, where 61% responded as to that being the most critical success factor. And that was followed closely by effective communication to stakeholders, managing change, and so on. And yet what typically goes wrong that derails a process excellence initiative is the lack of buy-in from senior leadership and changing priorities and these other factors that you see here on the screen. We solicited input from you, basically asking which topic you thought we could address, and not surprisingly, it was pretty unanimous that the lack of buy-in from senior leadership came up, which brings us to today's session. So I'm going to introduce our 2 speakers. The first, Rob Neufelder, who's a colleague of mine. He's the Director of Regional Operations for Integrated Project Management Company. Rob is continually involved with directing a team of project management professionals and applying project management best practices for clients in healthcare, life sciences, consumer and industrial market segments. He's led teams in the application and design of precision instruments for a wide variety of mechanical and electromechanical equipment, managing daily operations, engineering, departmental projects, budgets, and compliance with ISO 9000 and QS 9000 standards. Rob has a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Purdue and a PMP certification by the PMI, or Project Management Institute. He has applied his experience and knowledge in various improvement projects, including pharmaceutical, clinical, packaging, acquisition and merger, PMO, IT infrastructure, regulatory, operations, and process improvement. And in this webinar, Rob will show how he has successfully gained leadership buy-in and illustrated by examples from his consulting career. Our other speaker is Greg Flickinger. Greg is an active corporate member of PEX and the VP of Manufacturing and Corporate Engineering at Snyder's-Lance, and a member of the AIOE, the Alliance for Innovation and Operational Excellence. He serves as the chair for the AIOE's Workforce Engagement Subteam, and Greg will illustrate how he has successfully gained leadership buy-in from his own extensive experience. And this experience includes leading organizations through transformational change, structured process excellence, and continuous improvement initiatives. He brings excellent professional perspective from strategic technology development, product R&D, headquarter and plant operation initiatives, and brings those to bear on this topic. Greg has a passionate interest in leadership and change management and a deep understanding of the importance of communication. He has a PhD in chemical engineering and serves on the Florida State University Department of Chemical and Biomedical Engineering Advisory Board, and also previously served on the General Mills Foundation Volunteer Council. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Rob Neufelder.
Thank you, Tony, for the introduction. So, as Tony said, I am a colleague of his at IPM. My last 16 years have been spent here at IPM, specifically focused to project management and process-related initiatives. And just a couple examples of those, I think, to help get us started: product development process implementations, project management process implementations and improvement initiatives. Had the opportunity to develop an IT SDLC process and implement that, product launch processes, just a wide variety of processes. And all of those initiatives, I think, have common elements that I've tried to distill into the following slides. And while I've been both a practitioner and a sponsor for strategic initiatives, for purposes of today, I'm going to take the viewpoint of the practitioner, and in most cases, the viewpoint of the process initiative leader, kind of that mindset of that person who owns this initiative and needs to drive it forward into the organization. And then I'll be followed by Greg, who will take that senior leader perspective and share from that point of view. Okay, so starting at the top, leadership buy-in. Just exactly what is that and what does it mean? We tend to use the term leadership buy-in in many different ways, and I would suggest that it means different things to different people who are on the call today. I thought it would be good to try to baseline everybody first. I think we all know what bad looks like when we don't have leadership buy-in, and what I've attempted to do here is to show what good looks like based on my experience. I believe that it all starts with directional agreement on objectives. Objectives that ultimately support the overall organizational strategy. If there isn't buy-in on the basics, like objectives and expected outcomes, the initiative will certainly face uphill challenges. And I contend it may not be worth doing if you're not able to get that agreement up front. So it starts there. Leadership buy-in also provides access to resources, and it's the access to the right resources. And when I say resources, I mean human and capital, and it's access to those when they are needed. And in terms of capital, it's often doled out as needed. The capital is often doled out as needed. Where perhaps you may use a proof of concept to show that you can achieve the results that are proposed, and then it's funded further from there. Leadership buy-in also relies on informed decision-making. Senior leaders need to understand their options and the consequences of decisions. And I think that that is the responsibility of the initiative leaders, is to make sure that those senior leaders have the right information to make the good decisions. I've seen instances where a senior leader may just ask a simple question that teams have interpreted as a mandate, a question such as, well, can we do this faster, or can we skip a couple of steps? And the team may believe that that can't be done or is not the best thing to do, but the team not pushing back on senior leaders. I'd say that it's the responsibility of those team leaders to push back and to ask questions to clarify. And then the next thing is bidirectional trust. It's trust in both directions, and that's really born out of proactive communication. I have to say it's not always easy. There are often obstacles that must be overcome, but each obstacle provides the opportunity to build relationships within the organization and outside the organization, to build relationships with folks who will be impacted by the change initiative. And it also requires solid change management. Change management is such a large piece that I will focus on that separately in some coming slides. And then finally, I think good buy-in leads to shared ownership and collective decisions of the outcomes. So it's shared ownership of those outcomes. So hopefully that baselines it a little bit as to what it is. And next, talk about why is it important. As the statistic shows, 70% of strategic failure comes from poor leadership and execution rather than bad strategy. In many cases, I think the strategy is the easy part. The translating that into action plans is often where initiatives fall flat. Having well-defined processes or methodologies to obtain leadership buy-in and having the discipline to follow and use those processes is often the difference between success and failure of initiatives. And furthermore, execution competency can be a competitive advantage. If you can out-execute your competitors, you can often win. So where, or perhaps when, is leadership buy-in applicable? I contend that it doesn't really matter if it's a top-down driven initiative or an initiative that's driven from the bottom up, from the function. Buy-in is required in order to have ultimate success. Senior management-driven initiatives, an example might be we need to implement a new budgeting process to overhaul the annual budgeting process. Those senior management-driven initiatives need to be sold down into the organization. The what and the why needs to be shared, and the tie to the strategic vision also needs to be shared. And on the contrary, those initiatives that are driven by the functions must be sold up to senior management. Management, again, needs to understand the value, the ROI of the initiative, and they need to understand what the consequences are of not implementing and not implementing successfully. In either case, whether that's a top-down or a bottom-up driven initiative, there needs to be value to the business, and that value doesn't always have to translate to dollars. Some of the pre-seminar questions that we saw is how do you get initiatives approved that don't drive sales? Safety-related process improvement initiatives are some of those that I've seen that do not drive sales but are very much worth, they have value to the business and are worth doing. The key is, as an initiative leader, you need to sell the value of the initiative. So how do you gain it? It starts with alignment. That alignment is gained up front through open and honest dialogue. It's absolutely critical for those who are charged with implementation to seek clarity, to ask questions, to identify risks, and then to document in a charter or some other similar document. They need to establish open communication channels up front. My experience says that senior leaders like to see teams challenge and invest themselves personally in these initiatives and to push back up front when something is not making sense to ensure that there's good alignment. Second, we need to be aware of process intersections. Consider the entire business universe as you're looking to improve a process. So many times I've seen teams take myopic views and try to drive changes for a given process that affect unknowing stakeholders elsewhere. So you must consider the intersection of different processes as you're looking to drive improvements in any given process. And it needs to be adaptive as the environment changes. It could be a change in a senior leader, a change in a sponsor. It could be a bigger business change that affects the project. The key is, as a process excellence leader, what you need to do is be aware of the environment, and as it changes, you need to adapt. And then leadership buy-in needs to be nurtured over time via proactive communication. One of the common rules in project management is communicate, communicate, communicate. You can never communicate too much on strategic initiatives. And then my final point here is gaining and maintaining buy-in isn't about using the stick, it's about building coalition. All right, in this graphic what I'm trying to introduce is the concept of a senior leadership buy-in maturity model. Certainly we've worked in a number of different organizations that span anywhere across this continuum. Maturity grows from the left to the right, from stage 1 to stage 5. This is very much like a project management maturity model, a portfolio management maturity model. We've adapted that for today's webinar to senior leadership buy-in. So again, maturity grows from the left to the right. The top headings are the behaviors or the questions that senior leaders may be asking as they progress across the maturity model. And the bottom headings are the actions that the implementation leader or the team leader might exhibit. So to dive into this just a little bit, starting with stage 1, if the senior leader is confused, as the team lead, you might need to regroup, to clarify, to sharpen your approach. And so how would you know that they are confused? It would be by the tenor of the questions in the dialogue, some of which we have shown here. So remind me again why it is that we're doing this initiative. I don't really see the value. We don't have the time. I thought this initiative was dead. Things of that nature would tell you as the team lead at the bottom that you kind of need to regroup. You need to go back and get your facts together and begin to sell this initiative differently. Similarly, as we move to the right, if you have an interested sponsor, the action of the team lead is to sell it further, to show the value that you're going to be able to deliver. When we move to stage 3, we've got a willing sponsor. When the senior leader shows willingness, you need to further build the coalition, to socialize the concept further. Questions like, can you provide more details? Ultimately ending in the justification seems appropriate to me. And then ultimately when we get over to stage 5, when the senior leaders are convinced, you need to execute. At this point, you've built the framework. Senior leadership had supported you in building that framework. Now you need to execute. And all of this doesn't just happen. You have to work to build this framework. You have to work to build this sort of maturity. So the question might be, we've established it's good to have, so how do you get started? How do you actually get started in building this leadership buy-in? Well, again, I believe it starts with alignment up front. The best place to start is aligning on those objectives. That can be confirmed through a variety of documents. I've shown examples of those here. It's very good to document your level of agreement. Oftentimes you can have a conversation, but when you put it down on paper and you ask somebody to sign that in agreement, it takes on a different meaning. And once that's done, the onus quickly shifts to the team to effectively plan and ultimately execute. Keys include internalizing the initiative, making it your own, making that of your team, being transparent. If you find as a leader that you're not fully bought in, then you need to go back and challenge, because we have all seen this before, where a leader of an initiative isn't totally bought in, it becomes very apparent to those who are supporting them. They'll see your lack of buy-in, and it will absolutely negatively impact your results. And then finally, you need to take the time to develop a bottom-up plan that incorporates all concerns. And once you've done that, the foundation is now set. So you've heard me say communication is key many times already, but you might be wondering, how do I go about setting up effective communications for my initiatives? The short answer is that you need to have a plan, and that plan needs to be adaptable and adjusted over time. It starts with understanding the vision of the initiative and internalizing that, as we talked about. You need to identify all stakeholders and their individual needs. This is where I talked about the intersection of processes. Some of those peripheral stakeholders need to be considered as well. You need to develop a comprehensive communication plan, one that considers the needs of different stakeholders, and that kind of leads me to that next bullet point, which is customizing those communications. What we share at a team level, the detail that we share at the team level is often not appropriate to be shared with senior management. They need to know what time it is, not necessarily how to build the watch. And we need to decide up front how to share good and bad news. I've had situations on teams where analytical data was being captured, and we got a bad data point, and somebody ran off and shared that we had a bad data point before we had a chance to do the second sample, and we found that it was just an aberrant data point. However, as that team leader, I found for months we were having to re-clarify that no, we don't have stability issues because somebody had quickly shared a bad data point 3 months before. So again, I think it's important to understand and have a plan for how you're going to share good news and bad news. By no means am I saying you should put bad news under the carpet. What I am saying, though, is that you need to understand and verify that it is indeed bad news and that you have a plan on how to react to that. Next is identifying communication responsibilities, so who's responsible for communicating and when. And you need to revisit that plan and keep it evergreen. As I said before, things change, particularly on bigger initiatives, on longer initiatives. You need to keep your plan evergreen. And finally, visual communications help. One of the things that I thought of here is the annual United Way campaign that's done in so many companies, the thermometer approach, where you have some sort of a gauge, a visual that shows you how the initiative is doing. So here's an example on the next slide of a StageGate implementation project that we were involved with. And this became kind of that marketing front piece for the team to talk about, okay, what is it that we're looking to do? We're going to implement this StageGate process. It's going to help us achieve our near-term goals, which were actually stated on the slide. And that supports the overall vision. We're looking to climb our way to the top of this mountain, and then where we currently are, currently developing the plan, and we use this sort of a visual all the way through the initiative to update where we were in the plan, in the implementation. So I guess my point here is don't be afraid to market your initiatives and to gain buy-in through the use of visual communications such as this. Okay, so next I talk about trust. Gaining trust is a key responsibility of those tasked with driving process excellence initiatives. Gaining trust between the teams and management is vitally important. And when you lead an initiative, you need to build this trust. Sometimes trust is granted. It's granted as a result of reputation, perhaps past success, but most often it's earned through current performance. And a good thing to remember is that trust is gained and lost through actions, not words. You have to be able to walk the talk. You have to be able to admit when you make mistakes and have a plan for how you're going to recover from mistakes that get made. Mistakes get made all the time. The key is not to try to bury those, to own up to those. When you do that, you tend to build that trust. And my other note here is that it's much easier to be given trust in the beginning than to regain it once it's lost. And finally, it's worth the investment because it's very difficult to regain that lost trust. I say that trust and credibility are very closely linked. They rise and fall together. Those teams and organizations that meet their marks are often rewarded by getting what they need in what they ask for in terms of resources, in terms of dollars, what have you. As your credibility as an organization rises, as your credibility as a change leader rises, your ability, the likelihood that you'll get those resources that you need improves. Integrity and communication are absolutely key in building trust. So it's no secret that successful initiatives take into account the amount of change required and plan for how to drive change into the organization. I had promised earlier that I would talk specifically about change management. We certainly saw plenty of questions leading up to the webinar on change management as well. Process excellence, by its nature, implies change. Something is new, something is improved. There's some reason that we need to make a change to what we are doing today. And not everybody welcomes change. In fact, I would say many people don't want change. And we'll find it's a human nature. Find ways to avoid it where possible. And it's oftentimes out of fear of the unknown. So again, this is the tie back to change and communication. Regardless of the reason, resistance to change can compromise results if not properly managed. Both it can affect near-term results and sustaining results. And initiative leaders must lead effective change. It requires a planful approach to drive that positive change. So I like this graphic, and I certainly like the quote from Dr. Deming: "An organizational culture dominated by fear is incapable of serious change." The negative consequences of fear range from avoiding risks, having people hunker down, decide not to participate, decide that if I stay low long enough that this will pass, it won't come about. Perhaps they don't voice their opinions of very needed information. And in the worst case, they may decide that this just isn't for me and I need to find another opportunity. Effective communication is one of the key tools to driving out fear in organizations as it pertains to driving change initiatives and process excellence. So as a process excellence leader, you have to ask yourself, am I ready and willing to lead change? A couple of quotes here from noted change guru John Kotter, and a few more statistics note that without effective change management efforts, results will fail to meet expectations. I don't know of the people on the line how many of you are familiar with John Kotter, but an excellent resource on leading change and how to go about leading change. So I would recommend, if you want to learn more, to head down that line. Okay, so here are some ideas on how to drive positive cultural change. We've established that it's important, that you need to do it. It should be the responsibility of that process excellence leader. So how do you go about doing it and getting it started? I believe as well that this is applicable at all levels, whether it be that top-down driven initiative or the bottom-up driven initiative. The first and foremost is that we want to create that vision, which we have discussed already today. We want to be able to empower team members to apply expertise and to contribute per the established roles and responsibilities. We need to plan for and create short-term wins. Some may call it low-hanging fruit. Whatever it is, whatever we call it, quick wins are great momentum builders. So take advantage of those quick wins when we can. Consolidate the improvements that we get, those quick wins, and use that as positive momentum to produce more. And then ultimately we need to institutionalize the new approaches that we are developing so that we can have sustaining value in those. And then one of the other notes here is establish a sense of urgency. Again, in some of the pre-webinar questions that we saw, people said, they were asking those questions. Well, how do you get people interested if the initiative doesn't have an attractive title? I'm saying that as initiative leaders, that we can find those ways, establishing a sense of urgency, establishing good titles for our initiatives to gain the interest that we're looking at. And the reverse is true as well. People will run from those initiatives that look as if they are sinking. Many of IPM's projects are to rescue a previously failed initiative, and often they failed because of an underestimation of the change effort. So to wrap up my portion of the conversation here, I have a bit of a summary slide here on gaining and maintaining senior leadership buy-in. On the left-hand side, some of the do's, things that you should do. And on the right-hand side, some of the things that you want to try to avoid. So first of all, align. We've talked about that quite a bit today. Align to the business strategy and the objectives, and then consider all the different customers and what their needs are as well. And once you've got that alignment, you need to plan. Socialize the initiative, sell it, market it, show how progress will be made and how that progress will help the organization. And in all cases, push back on unrealistic expectations. Communicate. It's absolutely key. Market and sell. It's part of the job. It's not just one of those things that's nice to have. You need to be the champion for that initiative. You need to promote positive change and use data effectively to quantify results, quantify these quick wins, and in all instances, ask for help when it's needed. That gets to one of the behaviors to avoid, which is spinning and not owning up to what's actually happening. So as we go over to the other side and we look at what to avoid, it's bias. Number one, yours and that of senior leaders. We're all the product of our environment. We have our own experiences, and that creates bias. I think as an initiative leader, you need to step back from that and really challenge yourself to go in with an objective perspective on the initiative and the value that it can drive to the organization. You also need to avoid that compartmentalized thinking, that I'm just going to take care of my process and not worry about how it intersects with other processes. Ultimately, that leads to less value to the organization. Another one that I note here is overswinging. It seems like sometimes with these initiatives that we try to reach too far, that we're trying to hit a home run, when in fact we need a series of singles that are stacked up back to back to score the runs that we need to score as an organization. That kind of gets into the concept of phasing of initiatives, getting those quick wins and then building upon that. So I call that over-swinging, swinging for the fences. Non-commitment is another thing to avoid. You need to own it. If you own the initiative, if you have those open and honest conversations, others will see that ownership and they will fall in line. They will jump to support you. Senior leaders will see that ownership and they will do their best to support you as well. The next one I talk about here is reliving the past. You need to learn the lessons that you can from past experiences, but the focus needs to be forward-looking. It doesn't matter that we've been down this road before and it didn't work. Yes, you need to understand why it didn't work, but the focus is moving forward and not spending so much time in the past. And then finally, the politics of it, the spinning, the guessing. People on this call are all involved in process excellence. They're data-driven people. Use that data effectively. Don't use it to spin. And because you have data available to you, I say in most instances, it does no good to guess. So that is a bit of a summary from a practitioner's point of view. What I would like to do is turn it over now to Greg Flickinger, who will give us that senior leader perspective.
Thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cover a few concepts and really lace them in with examples. And the examples are focused really on the supply chain, but what I would tell you is the concepts are truly universal. And the intent of the examples would be, if nothing more than to provoke thought, and then hopefully allow you, again, to look at your situations perhaps a little bit differently, and then maybe think of a different approach that maybe will help you accelerate progress. So let's jump right into the executive. There we go. Let's jump into the possible executive barriers. And we always think about the high-level barriers that we hear about, and I almost call them the symptoms. And those are things such as we don't have funds, we don't have time, we don't want to distract people from their core work or their day job. And what I would ask you to do is think a little bit deeper and go beyond kind of what I would call symptoms, and then really try to look at and understand what is the root cause. And when you think about the root cause or those root cause barriers, particularly for executives, one of the items may be bias or ego. And Rob mentioned bias in his rundown. And if you think about people at the executive level, they've been very successful in their careers. They've risen to high-level leadership positions, and clearly what they've done throughout their career has been very successful. So with the awareness it's been successful, they may say, why should I change? Well, what we have to do is convince them that the business environment changed, perhaps there's a better way to do it, complexity has come into play, whatever it may be. But if you understand what's the root cause, maybe they're not listening because of not the content, but the fact that they've shown there's another way to do it in the past. So be aware of that, as well as be aware we may have our own biases that we seem as if we may want to always be right in their eyes, and there may be a need to effectively compromise to make progress. Next one is previous experience. And this really boils down to people who literally have experienced opportunities to engage in process excellence. They've spent lots of money, deployed many, many resources, and then have gotten poor results. So it was poorly executed. Whatever the root cause, all they remember is we spent a lot of money and resources and I didn't get results. Or perhaps maybe there were some level of results, but then it didn't sustain and it went back to the way it always was. Again, if you understand what is driving that person's barrier, what their underlying root cause is, now you may have another way to approach them. And then a third root cause potential would be a lack of knowledge. As people progress up into their higher level roles, the lingo can always change, the verbiage, the terminology, and that one can be confusing. Or two, which does kind of relate back to the ego, they may not want anyone to know that they don't really understand what you're telling them, so that could be effectively defrayed as a defense mechanism that creates resistance as no, we're not going to do that. So in essence, just be aware that those items that may appear to be the barriers, it may go much deeper. And if you can really understand really the person you're dealing with and what has driven their experiences, then you may have a better way to approach them. So the bottom line is the key to creating buy-in is really understanding the barrier, regardless of level, but especially at the executive level. Before I move on, I just want to throw out one more piece, or one more concept that I often find, is I often find people use a lack of corporate or executive leader buy-in as really the excuse for not moving forward. And what I would throw out to you is clearly it's a barrier. Clearly we want to have that buy-in from the onset, but don't let that be a problem in the short to the midterm, because there are a lot of things that can be done to create pockets of excellence, create successes, and then from there, people will begin to take notice. So don't let that be your barrier excuse. Use it as a rallying cry and then a catalyst to move forward. So the next question is, when is executive support required? Clearly, there's times where you cannot move forward unless you do have executive support. And those would be instances where it requires funding or significant funding. If it's going to involve a large piece of the organization or a division, or if there's headcount additions. So those are areas where, by all means, you're going to have that high-level executive support. So there are instances where I would tell you you don't need it because you can move forward, but then clearly there becomes an inflection point where you have to have it to move forward, and hopefully you've built enough degrees of freedom and shown enough success to then be able to pull them in. So I want to walk you through two launch examples of process excellence or continuous improvement, and examples that may be contrary to what one may expect. So the first one is an organization that had full buy-in. So this was a Fortune 500 company. Again, full formal buy-in, full training was developed. It was rolled out to the entire supply chain. Funding was available. Headcount additions were made into every site to help support the transition and the development within the sites. And in fact, some of the sites, in particular one historic site that had been in that organization, a very large manufacturing location, became one of the lead training organizations because they had already moved forward and effectively had shown success. So for all of us, that is the dream scenario. It is a no-lose proposition because all those things we hope to get are all lined up. Well, let's fast forward to the results. The entire program became primarily based on activity. In fact, I saw one person who was promoted in their promotion write-up. All it talked about was the activity they did. Increased the number of YYs or 5Ys by X%, did 5 more AM projects, and the list went on and on. And nowhere in that write-up did it talk about tangible performance improvement. Nowhere was there a reduction in budget dollars. It was all about activity. So again, another indicator that the focus may be on the wrong thing. And so again, fast forward about a year and a half in, that historic site that was one of the lead training locations. In fact, I went there with a large group from the supply chain to get the first indoctrination into the formal training. A new leader came into place and saw that, again, it was all smoke and mirrors, it was activity-based, and that site literally abandoned the whole effort and took a year off in hopes to restart and then trying to make tangible progress. Now, there were sites that had a lot of success, so there was tangible performance progress, there was tangible culture change, but it all came down to the leader and the leadership team and the fact that they were focused on performance as opposed to the activity to appease the higher level corporate executives that kind of knew how it should be done and follow the exact process, the rigid process. So my point here is everything with a launch can look perfect on paper, but if the organization's focused exclusively on process and neglects the people, then you're bound to not be successful and you're bound to failure. So that's an example of having full support. Let's look at an example where effectively we'd look at it and say, hey, there's no support. And in this case, it's a mid-sized company. The executive team wasn't really a roadblock, but there wasn't support. There's two quotes I can give you to kind of highlight what the level of support was. The first one was an executive said, I know why you do the CI stuff because you were capital deprived and there was nothing else you could do. So it was in effect saying, I don't believe in this, but I see why you'd go do it. Another comment that came from that person was, with respect to autonomous maintenance, is, what is AM? Something you do in the morning, kind of a snide joker remark. Again, really showing you where that person stood. So what happened? A few of the manufacturing locations had true believers in their leadership teams. They strategically leveraged TPM tools and TPM process excellence methodologies. They engaged their associates. They did the foundational stuff, standard work programs, AM efforts, basic root cause analysis. They engaged, they educated their associates, and they began to have progress. They began to show performance. And then as they built their credibility, then they began to ask for some level of funding to then, with self-funding to a degree, but additional funding to continue to accelerate. So what was the result in this case? Again, it was quite a number of years, but a little over 3 years later, that same SVP put on his goals and objectives for the year standard work implementation across the supply chain, reliability, root cause analysis, and all the tools that allow performance to be gained from a process excellence standpoint all went into his goals and objectives. So full buy-in was gained because he saw the results and saw what was leading down the pathway to performance. Furthermore, now the program's fully funded. So leader standard work, as an example, is being spread across the entire supply chain. Again, as I mentioned, it's on its goals and objectives, but we've also brought in a consultant group that is now helping to facilitate and support a much more rapid progression through the supply chain. And then beyond that, it is spread outside of the supply chain, and now actually the language has changed not just in the organization, but even into sales. And so now the sales team is talking about standard work programs like leader standard work. They are talking about plan, brief, execute, debrief as a process, and they're integrating it into their daily activity. So that pocket of excellence spread all the way through executive support and then started to spread across to adjacencies. So a great example of when effectively there may not be a whole lot of support and then generating it into really a lot of support. So the key takeaway would be, successful grassroots efforts have really translated in this case to full executive support. So focusing on the stakeholders, improving performance, that'll enable you to grow credibility, gain degrees of freedom, and then be able to go to someone with tangible results to help influence them to begin to buy in. So when it comes to executive support, the comment here is be careful what you wish for. Because another instance I'll take you back to, and this is a point when I was an operations manager in a true high-performance work system with a great leadership team around me. And the team was very vested in process excellence and developing the team on the floor, so at the action level where the value stream was. And in this case, the division vice president came to visit the site as typically one would do on an annual basis or even semi-annually. So he went to the plant tour, had some presentations, and in this case, the presentations were led by the associates who were really owning and running the projects. And the final presentation was how the team had used plan, brief, execute, debrief to cut their quarterly downtime by 25%. So it had been a progression over quarters and steady improvement and finally culminated in, up to this point, a 25% reduction, including effective startups coming out of this quarterly downtime. Well, that VP pulled me aside when the presentation was over and explained to me that we really didn't use plan, brief, execute, debrief because we did not correctly fill out what I'll call the canned corporate paperwork, because since we didn't fill out the paperwork, we didn't actually do it. My comment back to him was, but you don't understand, we're beyond that point. It's now a fabric of our culture. It's the way we do our work. And look, we got performance. So the point here is, if you have executive support, it may be so rigid that it may actually create another barrier. So be careful what you wish for, because sometimes it may translate into as much frustration as not having support. And it just so happens that organization was the same one that was activity-based, so you can kind of see the mindset. So when you think about a lack of executive support, again, don't let that be the barrier. As long as you're not stopped, you can create pockets of excellence. What does it do? It allows you the freedom to surgically deploy the right tools and processes for what your operation or your culture needs. Once you show performance, you can consolidate the gains and begin to build a coalition. And when the performance numbers are real, when they start to see them translate through and it's the dollars and cents on the P&L and it translates all the way up to the executive level, people begin to take notice. People listen, and then they want to replicate the results. And so your resistance goes away, and now they're coming to you to say, we love what you're doing. How do we do more of this? So again, it's the mindset of go build and create the value, and that will help to pull in the support. So when you think about process excellence, it's not really about the process. Of course, we focus on the process, but you need to think about it in the form of culture change, and it's culture change at all levels of the organization. And what I would tell you is, we need to look at the experiences we're providing, primarily the stakeholders, but the experiences that everyone in the organization is beginning to have. And what does that do? That shapes their beliefs. And when you shape their beliefs, the next step is people begin to take action. And then the outcome of taking action is we get results. And so quite often we focus on actions, results, and we miss or neglect the key component, and the key component here is people. What kind of experiences are we creating? What kind of beliefs are we shaping? So whenever I go into any process excellence effort, the first thing I think about is culture change. Now again, when you think about how to build support, we're always dealing with resistance. How do we minimize resistance? And the key point here is, we need to eliminate push, because the harder you push, the more resistance you're going to find. So the objective, and the objective that I showed you in some of these examples, is we need to create pull. And we create pull by allowing people to see results first, and then, as Rob mentioned, you start to build momentum, and then all of a sudden people want to join in, and they want to become a part of the effort. So that is the best way that I've found to create pull, is to show some key examples and not even declare it. Just really go out, show some examples, and then begin to pull people in. And so the last couple of minutes, and we'll get to Q&A, I just want to talk about a case study mistake, and a mistake that I personally made, and it really highlights what I just talked about. So I stepped into a new organization, and right off the get-go, I told the piece of the organization I was responsible for, I told them we're going to do all this great TPM implementation, and here's the results we're going to gain, and explain how great it's going to be. There was no burning platform for change, so I had to convince them that it was important by giving them examples. And I went even further. I tried to develop awareness, desire, and knowledge at the onset of the effort beyond my particular component that I was responsible for. So I met with other plant managers and site directors, pulled them into a group, and gave them a high-level rundown of the entire process, the value proposition. I even went so far as I bought them all the book, TPM and Process Industries by Suzuki, handed out the book and told them, hey, take this back with you and you can use it as a great resource. All that I created by that declaration, the right intent, no doubt, I was trying to help. All I did was I built a tremendous amount of resistance. There were people that were sitting in the background hoping I would fail and the organization that I had responsibility for would fail. And there were others that even began to actively undermine the effort. And so the point there was, after seeing what I inadvertently created, we retrenched, effectively went underground, and began to develop our people, let them experience the process. And then afterwards, after they said, wow, that's a great result, I'm proud of what I've done, I can't believe the performance improvement, then we'd say, hey, oh, by the way, you just did an FMEA. And then we'd start to explain to them the terminology and what it was they did, and now they were bought in because they had the opportunity to experience it. So the point there is sometimes declarations can create the highest level of resistance. So be careful what you declare, even though the intent is very positive, trying to gain buy-in. And so in a summary, it's all about the stakeholders. Engage the stakeholders early, get them on board. There's power in numbers. And then, of course, once the stakeholders are involved, the focus is on the process, but it's got to be about inclusion and engagement of the stakeholders into the process. Next, what I just mentioned, experience. Let people experience it. Don't give it a name. Don't give it a terminology. Don't even describe the bigger picture to them until they experience it. And when they experience it, they're going to have a great result. They're going to see the value, and then they're going to be receptive to whatever you call it. They really don't care because they like the results. And when it comes to results, results are the outcome. And the one thing that I always keep in mind is focus on the stakeholders and use the process as a vehicle for culture change, and then the outcome is results. Remember, actions, results. Don't focus on actions, results. Focus on culture change. Next point, people rarely care about what others have accomplished. So the effort, as I mentioned with my case study mistake, the more you try to build credibility by showing examples of other companies or other people, all you're doing is inciting higher levels of resistance. So be very strategic and be very careful about what you declare and what you don't declare. Think about where their ego may be. Think about where their biases may be, and just walk along the line cautiously, understanding where you may have some unintended consequences, again, of building resistance. And then finally, and this goes back to something Rob mentioned, it can be a positive or a negative momentum depending on where the project is going, but momentum is gained through pockets of excellence. And again, that generates pull. So in conclusion, my last point would be, real, meaningful, and sustained process excellence is about engaging the stakeholders. It's about unlocking discretionary effort, building commitment, growing ownership. It's all about the people, and when that happens, the executive team has no other option but to join in. So those are a couple of key points and a couple of experiences that I've had that hopefully will allow you to think about your situations a little bit differently.
Very good. Thanks, Craig. I think it probably makes sense for us at this point to go straight to the Q&A. So I turn it back to Craig.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the presentation as well. That was incredibly interesting. We've had so many questions come through. We'll try and cover as many of them as we can. Any that we do miss, I'm sure Tony and the guys can follow up afterwards. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. So diving right in. Okay. So can Rob define how to measure alignment? How does one know alignment has been achieved, or do we need to wait and judge alignment upon the results?
Well, I think that was one of Greg's points, is that results ultimately will tell how successful the initiative is. You don't always need to wait to the end of the road to be able to show results and build those pockets of excellence. Buy-in, I think, is also measured by, are you getting what you need? If you're not getting that buy-in, if you're not getting the resources that you need, then the likelihood is that you need to go back and you need to engage in conversation again and understand why. Greg, anything to add?
No, I think you covered it well. The most success I've found is building, again, the coalition, showing the results. Anytime that someone has tried to say, here's the results I'm going to give you, then it almost forms an unrealistic expectation of, I want results by the end of the quarter. And the way these things tend to work is there's a foundational building point, and then there's a hockey stick of performance, but you don't get it until you build all the foundational principles in. So I agree with what you said.
Good.
Cool. Thank you. The next question, Rob, I think this one is for you as well. Could you clarify evergreen? I believe you used the term during your presentation.
Yes, I did use the term evergreen, keeping communication plans, keeping any of your plans evergreen. What I intended to say there is that the environment changes all around you, particularly with a longer initiative. It could be that the process that we're about to implement came at a time when our CEO just announced that we're merging with another company, and the system that we're about to implement is substandard to the one that they already have. So instantly, the game has changed. And what I'm saying there is that you need to keep all of your plans, your communication plans, your initiative plans evergreen. You need to be aware of the changing environment and making sure that you're in step with that. Last thing that I'll say there is, even with the communication plan, as initiatives go on, it's not unusual for new stakeholders to be identified. You need to make sure that you're including their needs as you move forward.
Okay, thank you. Greg, do you have anything to add to that at all?
No, that's covered well.
Cool. Okay. Okay. The next question that we had was, rather than always trying to gain senior leadership buy-in, wouldn't it be a whole lot easier for a process improvement professional to simply access the organization's strategy map or strategic agenda and simply propose initiatives that are in line with or support existing strategic objectives? So it's quite a wordy question.
Yes, it's an interesting question. I think at the root of that question is, do you have to start from the bottom up and find your own initiative, or can you find something that's already on the map and drive that forward? And I think in all instances it makes sense to find something that aligns with the overall vision of the organization and the organizational strategy. Organizations build their budgets to execute what they have in the plan, not typically what they don't have in the plan. So if you find an initiative that's not in the plan or doesn't support the strategy, you're likely facing an uphill battle.
Yeah, I agree. If you have the strategy in hand, then almost by definition, they've already committed to the effort, if your effort is fully aligned with realization of the strategy. So the one effort I mentioned with getting the goals and objectives onto the SVP, that was literally going the other direction, trying to make sure that at some point, once it got in writing, he was hooked. So if you've got it in writing somewhere, it's going to be hard for someone to tell you not to do it if it does realize the strategy. So that's a great approach.
Okay, thank you.
Well said.
Oh, sorry, carry on. Sorry, Tony, did you have something to add then?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. There was one here that I thought was perfect for Greg. Where's it gone? Here we go. Okay, I think you've touched on this already in your presentation, Greg, but perhaps you can build on that. It was, what is a good strategy for dealing with a member of a team tasked with driving a change in a company, but who's not necessarily on board and can actually, in fact, bring down or negatively impact the team and the project?
Oh, so they've officially been tasked with ownership. That presents a difficulty, because the successes always happen when the true believers jump in and passionately, they're not going to take no for an answer. And the true believers are the ones that have always made successful initiatives. So if someone's been tasked with this, I guess my thought would be it's on their goals and objectives. So as a result, they're going to be judged by the success of the effort. So if you, in this, again, you have to take your ego and put it aside and just have full control of it. But if you can put yourself in a position to say, okay, I'm going to support this person and I'm going to give them the credit where needed and make sure that they are successful. It's almost the change management of an individual. When they start to see success and they start to get recognition from that person that they report to, then you're going to start to get buy-in. And then they're going to start to move along, especially when they see that you are not trying to steal the credit from them. You're actually giving them the credit, but it takes a person with a lot of character to be able to do that. But the key is giving them the credit, supporting them, and then once they get recognition, effectively you've got them hooked, because now they're getting recognized for something that maybe they didn't really do, but now they have to do it because they got recognition for it. So it's kind of turning it around just a little bit.
Very, very well said. Tony, do you have anything to add to that at all?
No, I love Greg's approach on that. He hit the nail on the head. I love it, and we concur.
Okay.
One other addition to that is this goes all the way down to the action level, to trying to get people on board. There have been times where I've taken frontline leaders and encouraged them to do something, whatever the effort may be, and really laid it out for them, and all they had to do is begin to go execute it, but knowing that they weren't fully bought in. And when they did execute it, just stood back and gave them all the way down credit for the idea in front of their peers, credit for the results in front of their peers, and then, again, same principle. By definition, they were bought in, and then they turned us into some of the biggest leaders that were pushing efforts.
It's a very altruistic, but I suspect very effective approach. Okay, we've had another question, kind of a similar kind of thing. What would you do as a change management consultant if there is a distance between you and the key executive?
It's a good question. If there is distance, and so distance a number of different ways: physical distance or just layers. I can't, I can't get access to the people that I need. I think it's still, you have to have leadership buy-in. You have to find a way to get that leadership buy-in. I think, as Greg said, don't let that be a barrier. I can't get access to that guy, so now that becomes my excuse for why I can't make progress and get it to get my initiative to a point to where I can get notice, get access, get whatever it is that I need. Just don't. I think too often that's used as an excuse. You may not need absolute full approval to make positive change, and that positive change can be built upon.
Greg, would you like to add anything to that?
I think that's covered well. It's the fact of showing progress, and the progress will always come out, and so there will be an awareness. So that, by definition, does create a connection, even though it may not be face-to-face. So rely on the successes to speak for themselves.
Okay. We have another question here on executive support, and I think possibly this is our penultimate question. We are running over time. Regarding barriers to executive support, please comment on how the focus on near-term earnings and brackets little else impacts gaining support and how to overcome this barrier. I think the question's right. A lot of focus seems to be very short-term, particularly when targets and KPIs are considered.
Yeah, I can take you back to a plant scenario, again, a manufacturing plant where, again, you are bound to the routings and bound to the budget. And really what our effort became, and it was the plant manager who really came up with the idea, was, we had to earn the credibility, but we had to generate enough funds to help fund what we were trying to do. So the effort was, we got to do our normal daily activity, but we got a few people to do a little bit extra building the foundation, building in some of the basic processes that were supporting the process as it stood today, but making jobs easier, making things more reliable, and in turn generating an improvement against budget. So we really went after very surgical approaches. Instead of trying to do the whole organization, we surgically hit places that we knew would pay back quickly. And when we applied those tools and processes to very discrete locations, the payback started to roll in, and then it built us degrees of freedom to do more, and then it bought us some credibility. So in those scenarios, don't try to bite the whole elephant off and build this huge foundation that's going to pay back in 2 years. Look for those discrete items that are going to have significant paybacks and leverage those to really catapult yourself forward. So be very, very strategic and very surgical about what you do.
Very well stated.
Do you have anything to add to that at all, Tony?
No, I would say, it is that low-hanging fruit, ensuring that you're identifying what that low-hanging fruit looks like. Mm-hmm. And when you are communicating, I think this goes back to one of Greg's earlier points, don't just focus in on listing the activities to get to that low-hanging fruit, but really do focus on communicating what those results are, those tangible results. And that will go a long way. If they're seeing those results first, then, again, they'll want to be part of the effort.
Okay. Thank you.
One last thing, Craig, to note on that, this is Rob, and that is that one interpretation of that question is how do you keep the day job from getting in the way of making true progress? And my contention is that the initiative leaders need to make sure that they're very planful in their approach and that they're efficiently using people's times so that you can advance initiatives while you're still getting the day job done.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob. I think we could possibly just squeeze out one more question. We are definitely running over. Final question is, and I think this is a nice one to close on, are there techniques and tools that will help counter resistance in middle management, assuming that you already have executive buy-in?
This is Rob. Starting first, I guess the same tools that you would use to gain the top-level leadership buy-in, the same methodologies, you would use to gain that middle management buy-in. That's effective communication, that's selling the wins, that's all of those basics that we talked about. I don't think there's any one special tool that's popping to mind for me. It is the combination of the approach that you're taking, that you would take to sell the initiative as senior management, that you would use at the middle management level.
Yeah, I agree that there are many factors why lack of buy-in, whether it's at the senior level or middle management, why it's not present. But gaining it always starts with that bidirectional agreement on objectives and expected outcomes. And it does require the trust from both parties, whether that is at the senior level, management level, or middle. Again, it goes back to the team leader. They need to assess where do they stand really with buy-in from a middle management level. If they're asking the same, those questions that Rob alluded to, why are we doing this, or I don't see the value, that's where that team leader should then go back and regroup and focus to regrouping and ensuring that the stakeholders understand the value. How does this initiative support the business strategy, and realize that there is that element of culture change.
One thing to add to the picture would be, what potentially is their resistance? And sometimes when you think about frontline leaders, so middle management, frontline leaders, if they look at a situation where, hey, I make all the decisions, I'm in control, it may be a matter of I'm secure in my job because, one, I know what I'm doing, and two, I've carved out this world that you need me. And they may have something in the back of their mind that says, whoa, if we put these processes in place, all of a sudden the process becomes more efficient. Will they need me anymore? So there could be that artifact of job security or risk to job that may play into some of these scenarios. It could be capability, want to change, but fear can be a big one. And then the last piece I'll put out there, but it's a reality. If you have executive support and you have support from the bottom and the sandwich is coming up and kind of squeezing in the middle, at some point in time, they have to make the decision, am I on board or not? And as the coalition builds and more people build momentum, they will begin to either stick out and will be forced with a choice. And the unfortunate reality is there will always be some that choose that that's not the culture they want to live in, and they may self-select out or may need to be selected out. It's just an unfortunate reality of the situation. So granted, we want to bring everyone along. If we can show them it's going to help them perform better and even bring more security to their job location or expand their functions to something bigger, I believe we can get most people to buy in, but there will always be a few that are going to be faced with a choice.
Okay. I think that's all we've got time for today. Rob, Tony, Greg, thank you so much for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Craig, and thanks to the audience.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. And thank you to everyone who attended today's webinar. I'm sorry that we didn't get to answer everybody's questions. They will be forwarded on to Rob, Tony, and Greg, so I'm sure the guys can follow up with you after the show. But that's all from us today. So as always, please don't forget that for additional white papers, podcasts, webinars, and more, log on to www.pexnetwork.com. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Goodbye.